#RuleIsCool. So I encourage you to follow along there. And then I also would encourage you to follow along on the screen as we're going to be asking you some challenge questions as we get ready to go here in a little bit. So just give us about another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll plan on kicking things off. You should be able to see my screen as well as the videos of our excellent esteemed panelists here tonight that I will share with you here in a little bit. If you are wondering why you can see all of the tabs along the top of my computer screen, that is because we are going to be doing an interactive webinar tonight. So we will have questions for you, and you know, this will not simply be a sit and listen to a screen, but you'll have an opportunity to connect in a variety of different ways. So give us about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I think we've got everything up and running. Just a couple of notes to mention as we get started here. I would like to first begin by welcoming you all. I know we have people here from a lot of different states. It appears in the chat. We have some people here from North Dakota. We have people from Nebraska. We have people from South Dakota. We have people from Kansas. And so we're excited to have you all here. On the screen is a quick introduction of what we'll be doing tonight. Number one, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the bios of the people that are joining us tonight, a little bit of a survey question, then an overview, and then we'll dig right into kind of what the Rural Impact Hub is, and then the bulk of our presentation will be focused on the evolution of economic development in rural communities. So each of our panelists tonight has a different area of expertise amongst other many great talents. And so they're going to be sharing with you specific stories from their communities that have been important to them as it relates to economic development. And then we'll finally have a forum, questions, and then calls to action. So we have a lot of opportunities here for you to get engaged and connected. If you are on your computer, I would encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A option. You can submit any questions you have throughout the entire duration of the webinar, and I would encourage you to submit questions as you have them, as opposed to at the end, so we're not jammed with a bunch of questions or waiting for you to type those out. And then you can submit those to everyone, or you can select who to chat with and answer them in the Q&A section as well. So there are a lot of different ways that you can participate. We are recording this webinar, and so you'll be able to use that, and we'll share that with you in the future if that's helpful to you. And then the final piece that I would share with you as well is the option at the end to have a discussion or to open and to kind of have a conversation as we are participating in this. We can actually enable participants to ask a question live as well. So if you have a question that you'd like to present right now, you are all muted, and we'll keep it that way at least through the duration of the beginning of the webinar so that we don't have any noise feedback or anything like that. But if you have something that you'd like to share or substance at the end that you'd rather speak about as opposed to type out, you just have to send a quick chat to us, and then we have the capability to flip on a microphone if you have that enabled on the device that you're connecting with. So a quick overview of who we have today, and a little bit of an overview of the Rural Impact Hub. The Rural Impact Hub is BCom Solutions social impact initiative because of our love for rural communities. So we have a physical location in Auburn, Nebraska, where many of tonight's viewers are tuning in from, and Kaylee from our team, who's on the slide here, is leading that charge in Auburn. I'm here in Lincoln to ensure that we have continuity if the internet would go out. And Kaylee and I lead our team at the Rural Impact Hub, and Kaylee coordinates a lot of the programming. And we do programming that's both local to the Southeast Nebraska area, and in this case, we also do programming that is national. So we have several upcoming events. We have a national webinar on rural education, as well as a media and politics in-person event. And if you go to the Rural Impact Hub's website, you can find all of those details, and I would encourage you to do that. So in today's lineup of who we have with us, I'm going to give a quick overview as to who they are, just very brief, one sentence for each that you can see here, and then we're going to flip to a question. So while I am getting this ready, or while I'm speaking about these people, if you could pull out your mobile devices, we're going to ask you a question using your smartphone. So if you have access to a smartphone near you, or someone has multiple, take one from them, and we're going to ask you a question here in just a second. So get that ready as I do these introductions. So first on our lineup, we have Kim Beeger from the Auburn Development Council. Kim is joining us live from the Auburn City Hall. And Kim does a lot of great work with rural communities in Auburn in particular, but is also involved in a lot of the Southeast Nebraska initiatives that take place around economic development. Then we have Andrew Ambriz joining us from the Custer County Economic Development Group. And Andrew will be talking later about young people and economic development, and how do you garner attention to multi-generational economic development. And then we have Garry Clark joining us. Garry is doing two dual representations tonight. He is joining us on behalf of the National Rural Economic Development Association, which is a mouthful, or NREDA. And Garry is based in Fremont and leads the Greater Fremont Development Council. We have Scott Sproul joining us from the Northwest Kansas Economic Innovation Center, and he will be talking about remote work and how to, amongst other things, how some of the initiatives that he's leading are helping connect rural communities and remote workers. And I'll wrap up and be the moderator throughout the webinar, but for those of you that know me or have connected with me, I will not be doing the majority of talking on today's session, which is equally as hard for me as you can probably imagine. But we're looking forward to spending some time with you tonight. And I think it's exciting to have such a unique and diverse group of people here that are going to share diversity in experiences, locations, amongst other things. So we're going to flip over to a survey, and we have two questions for you tonight. And what I would encourage you to do, you should be able to see on my screen here, this is why I have a million tabs open. If you go to menti.com, MENTI.com, then you should be able to access the link here, and you'll enter a code that says 401815. And when you do that, you'll be able to answer some questions. Our first question is, please describe your interest in rural economic development. And look at that, you can see someone has already submitted. So go ahead and answer that question, and then there should be a second question that pops up for you. If not, I'll toggle to that when we get done. So take just a minute. And if you are joining from a group, feel free to fill this out in person as well. So as you're filling these out, kind of shout out if you're in Auburn or if you're in another watch party location, feel free to shout out who you are and who you represent. And we'll wait about 30 seconds to a minute. I'm going to go on mute here for a second while you all fill this out and we see the results come in. All right, great. So it looks like we have a good mix of people joining us tonight. We have business owners, economic development officials, we have some elected officials, and we even have some young people and students. Excellent. And then the second question here on the list, if you go ahead and refresh, or click to next, you might have to enter that code again, but using the same code, go ahead and answer the question tonight I'm most interested in learning about. And you should be able to check multiple. If you can't, then that's an error on my part, but you should be able to select more than one. The options include everything from engaging with young people in rural communities to how to better recruit talent in your community, remote working, and also traditional economic development and the role that that plays in kind of a larger economic development strategy as well. All right. So of our top hits here, we have engaging young people in rural communities. So Andrew, you have your work cut out for you there. Better recruiting talent to your community, attracting startups to rural America, and then traditional economic development has the lone one. I'm glad we have equal representation on all of these fronts. So I would ask that our panelists actually make sure that they're making note of this to weave in these pieces into the conversation that we will be having. And I'm going to now move this over to back to our slides here. And we're going to start with our first panelist here in just a second, and I would just do a quick introduction to Kim's portion of the webinar is focused largely on the work that she has done in more traditional economic development, some recent events in Southeast Nebraska. And I thought it was important that we have a mix of people tonight on tonight's panel from a variety of experiences. So rather than just talking about one economic development method, I believe that there should be a synonymous correlation between economic development and community development. And Kim has been an advocate for both of those things in a lot of different ways. So I'll let Kim tell you all a little bit about herself and the role that she plays, and then she's going to answer two questions about traditional economic development and how do you build that into a larger economic development strategy in the time that she has. Kim? Oops, you're muted. There you go.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kim Beeger. I work for the city of Auburn, and I also sit on the board for Auburn Development Council. I wear a lot of hats, and I sit on a lot of different boards and committees in Auburn. The event that Brent is talking about in June of 2018, our major manufacturing facility, Aaron's company, who manufactured outdoor power equipment, announced that they were going to be closing their Auburn facility and relocating that production back to their Wisconsin plant. This, was of course going to be devastating to us. They had around 193 employees at the time. We didn't exactly know how we were going to fill that. I will say that one of the things that helped make this process go as smooth as possible, I had a good relationship with the manager of the facility. I have been in communication with him, so we kind of knew in May that things were not seeming right. So we started to prepare for different outcomes. Coincidentally, this started to happen at the same time I was in Gothenburg at the Nebraska Economic Development Association, We had started compiling a team of state professionals that could be aware and be ready to help us when the time was needed. So June 14th, the corporate office for Aaron's came down, made their announcement to the employees that they would be closing by September. So we had a group of state representatives as well as local representatives in that meeting, so we could get to work right away. So we all pulled together. We started an economic development advisory board. This was a group of local leaders within our community that could work independently and alongside with Auburn Development Council, so we could be tackling quite a few things at the same time to expedite a positive outcome. So we worked with the management team at Aaron's company, and we were ultimately successful in getting a company to come in within those 90 days and had a seamless transition. I will say one of the things that helped with that is that we have a Stronger Economies Together, a set, 5-county regional economic development group, besides all of our own individual economic development groups within our county and cities. That set has given us resources beyond just our local resources and connections and networking. So that really helped. One of the managers at Aaron's was sitting in on that group and also had made connections. So he was comfortable enough to reach out to other people within our region and actually get the information about Aaron's out there in a wider dispersed area. And we ultimately found a company to come in. So this happened on June 14th, and on September 21st, Aaron's, that was their last day of being in Auburn, and on September 24th, that Monday, Fast Global Solutions took over full operations with all of the employees that signed to stay on. So we were thankful. We're thankful for all the community support. Peru State College stepped up and offered scholarships to the Aaron's company employees and their families. And we just really had a great rally of community support to help us through this.
Great. Well, Scott asked a question that I think you indirectly answered, or directly, I guess, at the end, about what methods of recruitment and incentives did you use? And Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but Peru State College stepped up and offered scholarships to the folks that were going to be impacted by this, right?
Correct. That is correct. As far as incentives, we worked with the state Department of Economic Development. We worked with Nebraska Public Power District, as we are one of their wholesale customers. And we worked with the Department of Labor. And Auburn is a TIF community. TIF is a tax increment finance community. So we were able, with all of these tools in our toolbox, we were able to put some packages together and offer incentives to the company. Great.
I would just, as we move on, for sake of time, we'll come back around if we have time for more questions as well. I think it's just to summarize that, I grew up in Auburn, for those of you that are joining from other places, and there are probably a handful of companies that employ over 100 people. And when you find out that you are losing one of those, it kind of sends the community into shock. The equal shock to me was that within 90 days, 100 plus people had job stability in that case. So if any of you are joining from rural communities or even if you aren't, but you're interested in more about it, at the end, we'll give you contact information to reach out to Kaylee and our team, and she can connect you to each of these panelists if you'd like to know more. I would say that Kim is also the expert on all of the economic development acronyms like TIF and SET and anything else that you can possibly think of. And I'm sure that she would be happy to share more about those things. So if you have questions, continue to fill them in the chat or the Q&A box, and then we'll move on to our next panelist, Andrew, who is going to talk about the role of young people in rural economic development. And I would say from my perspective, I met Andrew maybe 2 years ago now or so, and he has served in a couple of different roles, at least in rural economic development director roles in very rural areas of the state of Nebraska. And so Andrew's going to share a little bit about his background, as well as, why is he inspired as a young person himself to recruit young people to rural communities, and what does he think the role of intergenerational economic development is, because I don't think millennials can solve the problem or baby boomers can solve the problem, but everyone collectively together needs to work collaboratively to solve the problem. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to tell us a little bit more about himself and answer some questions.
All right, thanks, Brent. And I know there's a lot of people that selected this topic in particular, so you put a lot of pressure on my internet connection, and I hope we can keep up. Like Brent said, I had a really interesting segue into economic development. I'm traditionally an animal scientist, but through the Rural Futures Institute, they actually offered me an internship that landed me with economic development. 2 weeks prior, I had no idea that economic development existed, except for maybe Garry Clark. He was the first one that kind of introduced me to it. So when I hopped into economic development, I saw exactly how communities worked. And that kind of lit a flare under me because it's so complex, and each of the different facets working together in a community, kind of like what Kim was talking about, how all of those work together to really make an efficient system was interesting, and that's what landed me where I am today. So like Brent mentioned, I'm in Custer County now, and some of the work I've done has been particularly toward engaging young people in a community, and a lot of that comes back to this serviceship idea that the Rural Futures does, as well as just internships in general, introducing people to your community and giving them opportunities to connect with other people, sort of in the mentorship role. I think that's a huge key, is really targeting those young people and saying, we want you to be a part of this thing that we call economic and community development. So being really thoughtful about seeking out those individuals that you want to be a part of your community. That's the first step. The second step is being really thoughtful about how and who you connect those people with. We have our interns get really connected really quick. So sending them out and making their connections, building their network, so that at any one place, they're always at least one connection removed from anyone in the community. That gives them that sense of power and that connection to the community that allows them to go and do these things. So if they have an idea and they want to roll with it, they know they have this network that they can go and accomplish those things that they want to. There's no silver bullet for this. You can't make anyone do anything, don't get me wrong. But targeting young people is asking them what they want to do and what they enjoy, and connecting those two desires. Because we want young people to move back here, but we've also got to make them a place to live and a place that they enjoy. Because anymore, and Scott's going to talk about remote work in a second, young people want to live in a place that they can enjoy and choose to be. And so we want to create those sorts of environments in our own communities. And who better to tell us what that looks like than young people themselves. So that's a real quick edit. And I know, like I said, so many people were really interested in this topic. So I'm really looking forward to your questions, especially if they get a little bit more specific and we can flesh out some of the details. But if I can hang my hat on one thing, it's, get some internships going and get young people connected in your community before they walk across the stage with a diploma.
Great. Andrew, can you talk a little bit more? So I just tweeted out the link to the Rural Futures Institute, which is based here at the University of Nebraska and does a lot of great work. Can you talk about, in kind of a multitude of ways, number one, a little bit more about their fellowships? And I know that they've kind of evolved over the years, and I don't know what they look like now, but what did that fellowship look like when you went to the community? What were you doing? And then just answer a quick question. You can answer this before or after, but should interns be paid? And the answer to that is yes, in case you were wondering, but I'm going to let Andrew answer that on his own. But just talk maybe a little bit more about that as well with the Rural Futures Institute and the fellowship program.
Okay, Brent, I missed the tail end of your very last question, but I think I've got the gist. So the Rural Futures Serviceship is evolving, and what it's going to take form of, hopefully sooner rather than later, is this upcoming summer. We really want to dig into some specialized areas for these interns to really target these key areas in community. In particular, I think early childhood development is one. So, some of the quote daycare crisis that's going on in rural communities, how do we accommodate that sort of base? But the Rural Future Serviceship in my case was 2 weeks prior to that, I found out that economic development was a thing. I showed up in the McCook community with my wife of 3 days at the time. And we had this little 20 by 20 house that we rented during the summer. And my first day at work, I met my first real mentor in economic development, Kirk Dixon. And he connected me with Ben Dutton, another individual with the Community Vitality Initiative. And what they did for me really shaped how I've mentored interns since. And that is, here are the big overarching goals that we want you to accomplish. They're two really big projects, but you have all 10 weeks to do them. We're going to give you the assets and the network to get them done, but you have the freedom to go and accomplish it your way. And that sort of freedom really set the tone for how much I could go and do in that McCook community. And that's ultimately why we ended up going back after I received my diploma at the university. The internship question, I go back and forth, but I think to make a really rewarding experience, yes. Having interns, particularly at the college level, enter your community, earn their living, I think it kind of sweetens the pot a little bit, but they understand the brevity of what they're working with. Our communities take this work really, really seriously. And so much of what we do flies under the radar, but I think especially internships in community development, those paid internships just really get them engaged a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Can you just add one thing? And I know that we got to move on for sake of time, but you talked a little bit about the daycare. You slipped that in there. I think people see economic development as commerce and agriculture and tech startups. And can you just talk a little bit about the things that you've seen in the community that support young families? I know from daycares to, I know in Red Cloud, they've got a brand new child development center. So, just briefly, what's important to you as a young parent? And how do you feel about rural communities as a place to grow both your professional career, but also your family and your personal life?
Well, we've obviously chosen the rural route. Early on, I've got an 11-month-old son, and we love being in rural America. But with that, there's challenges, and daycare is exactly one, Brent. So I think a lot of those factors of quality of life, Janet 80 with 80 Advantage, I think a couple people may know who that is. Her three-wheel or three-slice wheel of economic development, I think paints a really clear picture about the relationships with businesses, but also the placemaking factor. So are we making this a place that not only people can earn a wage, but can they do that thoughtfully? Here in Broken Bow, we have a Becton Dickinson facility. It's 12-hour shifts, 4 days on, 4 days off, and it makes it really tough. But we've got a handful of people here that have gone out of their way to accommodate those BD worker schedules, and it's made a whole host of difference in BD having more people available to employ. We're a 560-person facility right now, and that sort of production number would be unfathomable without, you know, one or two parents being able to drop their kids off at these daycare facilities. So I think it really fits into that placemaking piece. And, you know, as economic developers, we have our hands in a little bit of everything. But for the sake of time, I'll stop there and kick it back to Brent.
Cool, thank you. Well, as we move on, we've got two more panelists. I would remind you, as we're kind of at our halfway point, to submit any questions that you have, either in the Q&A or chat section. Either one of those works to do so. And you can ask about any of the topics, or if you just have a general question that you'd like myself or one of our panelists to discuss, make sure that you're filling those in as we go along. It won't distract us as we're moving forward. And I forgot to move forward the slides for Andrew's picture, so I'll give you a minute to dream about Andrew being your economic development director in your community, and he can recruit you to live nearby him soon. So we're going to turn things over to Garry here in a second. And like I mentioned, Garry represents both the National Association for Rural Economic Development, and I'm sure that they would love to have anyone's participation and involvement. I won't solicit you to join the NREDA. I'll leave that to Garry. But he represents both the National Association, but also plays a role at the local level within the community and in the greater Fremont area. And so I invited Garry to be a part of this and the NREDA to be a part of this to talk both about, you know, their local experiences, but also what are the things that are taking place at the national level? What are the ways in which people can participate? Because I think it's really exciting when we were coordinating this event. It originally started as an in-person panel in our Auburn location. And then we toyed with the idea of promoting this as a webinar. And I will give cheers to North Dakota. We had about 10 people from North Dakota register within the first day. So you can take all the credit, any of you from North Dakota, for us turning this into an entire webinar format as opposed to an in-person event solely. And with that, we wanted to make sure that we talk about the larger community of rural economic development, and that this is really a national community as well. So I will turn things over to Garry to do a quick introduction on himself and his background, and then to answer a couple of questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Garry Clark, as Brent mentioned. I am originally from Washington, D.C., and so I took that dive into the rural life some years ago. I won't date myself here, but I have been in Northeast Nebraska for quite some time, and I've served as the economic developer in Cumming County, which is how I know just how good of a basketball player Andrew Ambriz is, because I got to coach him while he was in high school. Not dating myself. All right, so additionally, I came to Nebraska to get my education and found out that it was such an amazing place that I started to get the opportunity to cut my teeth after a few stints on the East Coast in Cumming County, actually, in West Point, Nebraska. I'm currently a part of the National Rural Economic Development Association, which it has been in operation since the 1980s, late 1980s. And that effort has been solely on rural places, how to improve and excel at rural life. And so some of the components to the National Rural Economic Development Association has been for quite some time the focus on policy, the focus on creating opportunities for professionals to gain knowledge and network with other professionals. But one of the key components here that separates us is that we also have a foundation from electric co-ops that have serviced most of rural America. And we've also worked with telephone co-ops as well. This is an organization, if I was to answer the question that Brent originally asked me, which was why NREDA? This is my quick 30-second pitch. If you're a part of any other organization that is focused on economic development, you may get bits and pieces that focus on rural life. But for NREDA, that's our whole lifespan. That's our focus. Every day we're talking about economic development efforts in rural communities, how local practitioners can better themselves in their communities, finding ways that we can equate opportunities through working with USDA nationally, working with housing programs nationally, and also broadband. So we have a group of people whose sole focus has been on how do we make rural life better? How do we find out what permeates our lives? And so NRADA has done that for quite some time. And so I'll dive into just kind of answering some additional questions there. I would say that one key component to how we've done things nationally is every other year, NRADA focuses on bringing in stakeholders and executives to go into Washington, D.C. and meet with policymakers and focus on pushing the efforts and initiatives that our organization has put together annually and then also on a national level. A few things and components that we find that are shifting today, and I know Brent would talk about this if he had the time to do so, is that the paradigm shift that's taken place with economic development. And I think most of the panelists would agree that there has been a shift. And for me in Fremont, Nebraska, we found that we used to focus on smokestack chasing, and we obviously have Costco, Lincoln Premium Poultry, bringing 800 to 1,000 jobs to our community. And in that vein, it has pushed us to think about quality of life more. We've recently raised $1 million, over $1 million locally to create a fund that is now close to $2 million for rural workforce housing in all of Dodge County. Our efforts here locally, it's almost a microcosm of what's happening nationally. Workforce is an issue. Housing is an issue. Transportation is an issue. Broadband services is an issue. How do we recruit young people is an issue. And part of that is because we have for quite some time chased after businesses and left it there, creating those jobs and then walking away. And that's not enough. It's never enough anymore. And so I'll kind of let Brent lead us on to some other discussion there. But my final piece would say, parting piece would be that this is a holistic effort now. If you're an economic developer in rural places, if you're not focusing on a combination of all of those subsets, it's going to be a struggle.
Great, thanks. One of the questions we had that came in from Kenny was, how should a county without a countywide development entity like Greater Fremont or Custer County approach countywide development? Garry, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So I spent about 6 years doing that in Cumming County. We created one organization from scratch. I would say that building relationships is key, and realizing that we're now going into this regional hub where opportunities are more regional and that we're stronger together, which is one of our regional taglines that we use. And so the key component to that is creating those relationships with the at-large communities in your county and making sure that they understand that if you are packaging deals and opportunities together, it's so much more stronger for your proposals, it's stronger for your overall look for your communities, and it shows greater impact.
Great, cool. Well, thanks for giving us that information. We're going to move on to our last panelist, and then we'll do a cycle of round robin questions. If people have any particular questions that they want to answer or ask, you can do that. And then we'll have some time as well. We'll do a survey as well at the end, similar to the first one. So I'm going to turn things over to Scott, and Scott is joining us from Kansas, where he leads the Northwest Kansas Economic Innovation Center. The prerequisite for all economic development things is that you have at least a 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 word title that you then turn into an acronym. Generally starts with N for national, or it ends with economic or innovation. So there's a tip for everyone out there. But Scott's going to talk to us about a variety of things that they're doing, and would love an introduction as to what you're doing at the center. But we recently reconnected on some of the things they're doing around tech education and remote work, and what does that look like, and how do you look at a remote employee, maybe one person in a company, in one individual town, not as just one body, but as an opportunity for economic development in that rural remote workspace. So I will turn it over to Scott to do an introduction, and then to share a little bit more about their efforts.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Appreciate the opportunity for this. Scott Sproul, I'm the president and CEO of the Northwest Kansas Economic Innovation Center. We're a private operating foundation formed out of the Dane G. Hansen Foundation, which is a private foundation as well for primarily did more community development, and now is figured out that we have a depopulation in 24 of the 26 counties that foundation served, and we had to take an effort in economic development as well. So they recruited me to run this organization. First off, I want to apologize to all the North Dakota people for taking your football coach, and as you can see up behind me, that was not planned. I'm sorry, but anyway, just wanted to reach out to you guys and say we're sure happy to have your coach to join our staff here at K-State. So anyway, we're in the northwest quadrant of Kansas. We cover a quarter of the state. And as I mentioned on the depopulation, and Andrew spoke to this too, we've got to be attractive for the youth and give them opportunities to come back to our communities, whether they have a desire to be in a brick and mortar, if they have a desire to work, which we're going to talk about today. Additionally, there's a level of entrepreneurship that can come out of remote work as well. And we spent a couple years really researching this and trying to get down into the weeds of how do we leverage what has already been built in our communities. Number one was a fantastic fiber network. I'm 4 miles from our nearest central office. I'm on my farm tonight, having this conference call in the basement of our house, which is tremendous because we have the connectivity in a lot of places. And previous to this, I worked at a telephone company that did a lot of ISP and internet service. And it was a struggle to figure out how to really market that to the greater masses. How can we maximize that opportunity? So that really ingrained in me that we have a great resource here that we're not utilizing. So we started working with the Ogallala Commons organization. They are an organization that covers 8 states, which Nebraska and a lot of the land mass that's under the Ogallala Aquifer is covered by this organization. So you have on your screen Rural and Remote. Rural and Remote is basically a connective network where people can ask questions. How can I be a remote employee? How can I get this opportunity for me and my family, add some additional either income in their family budget, or to take yourself from a $8 to $10 an hour job, which are very there's so many $8, $10 an hour jobs in our area, and how can I turn that into a $20 an hour job? So there's a lot of training methods that have to be done for somebody to work remotely. They have to really understand the discipline and the dedication it has to be for that opportunity. One of the things that we really feel like we're going to be strong in is connecting them to those opportunities. We just started doing some research across the region of how many people are working in remote opportunities. And there's a tremendous amount that we didn't even realize was already happening right under our own nose. So this thing is something that we're wanting to begin creating cohort groups that work together. They have an opportunity to work together because they're in a very isolated opportunity. There's additionally some co-working spaces that are being developed across the region that I think is going to really give them an opportunity to get out of their home setting and interconnect with people. So we currently are, we have 11 people in a coding academy. That coding academy goes through Inspire Labs out of Lubbock, Texas. And that connection was made through the Ogallala Commons as well. It's actually formulated through Bottega Tech out of Salt Lake City, Utah. And that organization basically has taken industry leaders in the tech field and continue to refine that opportunity for advancing that curriculum, because if you don't advance the curriculum, you kind of lose touch of what's really happening in the real life and real business. I'm not a coder, and neither is the guy that's helping me run this program, but we're real excited about what large companies like Apple, we've met with Apple several times to talk about, what do people need to know? How do we embrace this diverse piece of the economy that's currently not in place? And Menlo Technologies is another big company in California. And honestly, folks, they're saying that it's better for them if they can find dependable remote employees that can do this from rural communities. It's cheaper for them. It's a great opportunity for people to make money and have a great quality of life. And so we're real excited about our new initiative. We'll be launching our new initiative in March. And so you're going to probably see a lot of that around on primarily social medias, because our core audience is obviously college students that are getting ready to graduate. We do have an opportunity for high school kids to get into a coding camp, which gives them 150 hours of coding over summertime, and creating a apprenticeship that goes along with this training is key to get them job ready and ready to go into the remote work. So I'll leave that and would love to hear some questions, and probably a lot of things I can't answer, but we're working on it.
Cool, great. Well, Scott, one of the questions, we've got a couple of questions that have come in, but one that I want to ask you specifically was from Mark. How did you do the research to understand the rural remote workers in your community?
I'm sorry, cut out a little bit. Can you say that again?
Yeah, how did you do the research to understand rural remote workers in your community, finding them, identifying them, so forth? Because inherently they're rural, so they're remote, so they're probably, working from home. Did you go knock on people's doors, look in their windows? What sorts of things were you doing to identify those pieces?
Yeah, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, to be quite frank with you. But they're very to themselves. They don't interact other than at community events and that sort of thing. How we found most of them was actually putting the rural and remote and talking about pushing out to communities on the remote work and getting them to ping in on social medias and that sort of thing. Social media is going to be huge in this initiative because of the demographic we're really targeting for it. It's interesting that I don't think we've even uncovered what's really happening out there. We're finding some really great senior developers that, if you look at the hierarchy of this type of work, you've got, you go from training, apprenticeship, into junior coder, and then you go into a senior coding capacity. Senior coding capacity typically has a lot of project management involved with that, and allows that person to basically not only do the organization of the projects, but also to manage employees. So finding some of those people in our region was terrific. They were very isolated. They really didn't know that a lot of other people were doing this in the region, and it's really not developed to the capacity we want. But these co-working cohort groups could be people that actually have a national job with maybe a Panera Bread that needs somebody to develop apps ongoing and to interact with their customers. Or it might be a freelance network that's put together that bids on jobs together from our region. Right. It was interesting to me that the state of Kansas typically goes to an outside of the state organization to get all their marketing and strategies done. And I'm like, oh, wow, there's a great opportunity right there to put work into these cohort groups and these apprenticeships.
Great. Great, thank you. So a question that I'll extend to all of our panelists that came in, and then I'll kind of add on the end of this, was from Lucas, and he asked, how do we as economic development professionals work to recruit individuals for workforce to our own areas without competing with other rural communities or regions? So I'll extend that question to Garry, Kim, Andrew, or Scott, whoever would like to jump in, or I'll jump in at once and add some comments.
Okay, I'm going to take dibs. I like this question, so thanks, Lucas. I think the short answer is you can't. We're competing for a finite resource. I mean, we're talking about people. So I think there's different channels with which to find your workforce. We're talking about a transitioning workforce. Are we talking about an underemployed workforce? Are we trying to establish a pipeline with a post-secondary education institution? So I think before you worry about stepping on people's toes, the first question to ask is who are you looking for? Understand what your workforce needs are and exactly what those skills are, and then identify certain places to find some of that talent. Becton Dickinson, like I mentioned before, has a huge need for people in plastics and molding, and so they end up at Pittsburgh State. I mean, it's just identifying who those people are, and then maybe you're really starting to step into some of that rival territory. But I think to really get further into your questions, who is it that you're looking for in order to fill those workforce needs? And, are we talking about just cross county lines? That happens sometimes here in Custer County, and then in Valley County, just a short drive away. But, typically those are the jobs that turn over more frequently than necessarily finding someone to fill an engineering spot or like a supervisor or manager lead role. So I think the competition is always going to exist, but I think you can find success if you get really romantic about who it is you're looking for.
Great. Does any other panelists have anything to add on that? Garry?
Yeah, go ahead, Garry.
I was just going to jump in and give an example of how we operate currently. We've partnered with the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce, and there's 5 other counties a part of that partnership, and we share leads. We share leads and efforts to lure in businesses and people. And we've come to the realization that one successful project that goes into one of our small communities, like a Cass County area, that benefits us all. And so we share those leads with the understanding that one project can benefit us all, but it can't hinder us all if we don't get it. So,
right. Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that, a lot of times when students leave our high schools, particularly in our region, it's very difficult to keep connected to them and keep them within our network. And I think what we're starting to see at the university level, community college, obviously, and even the tech world, is that they're wanting to be more engaged with us as economic developers to bring opportunities for them. And I don't underestimate that those opportunities are great, because you've got thousands of a captive audience right there at a university level to continue working on that. It's easier to do that in a little bit of a regional sense, where you have connectivity to what type of workforce you need, what type of workforce you're seeking. I mean, you may not even need these people today, but how you're going to decide how to diversify your economy and your rural community should lead you to great dreams of how you can recruit those people that already know rural they're okay driving 3 hours to Denver or 5 hours to Kansas City for entertainment purposes on the weekend and coming back. The education process is just so much more smaller there.
Great. Thank you. So we are wrapping up here. So anyone that has questions that are still coming in, I'm going to ramble for about 3 to 4 minutes here and just kind of tie some things back together. So please submit those questions as they're coming in. One of the things that I wanted to add on the competition piece, not from an economic development standpoint, but from a business standpoint, when we started BCom in Auburn, we were the only web designer in the community. And 9 times out of 10, and I would say that our team would probably agree with this, is it's a lot easier to compete with someone because you can compare and contrast pros and cons than to compete with nothing. And so I think that's the way that I approach it, is competition should be healthy. Now, if it's toxic, that's a whole other, probably a whole other webinar on conflict resolution. But I think that's an important piece, is that competition is healthy. And if someone's leaving to go somewhere else, it's probably because you weren't competitive enough. Now, that in a business case, that's probably a little bit easier said than done in the economic development space. But I hope that rural communities will see that as an opportunity, that it's great if you want to recruit 5 different grocery stores, or 3 gas stations, or 2 web design companies, because the only thing that's going to keep those people in business is either them growing out of their community in some cases, or them working directly with and competing, and knowing that there's someone down the road that probably is also looking for business as well, and that keeps them engaged in the community. So I just want to wrap up with a couple of different things, and I'm sharing our Rural Impact Hub mission statement and our delivery commitment to you all. I have a ton of notes here that I've just been taking, and so this is a little bit of a rapid fire just to kind of wrap some things up. Number one, at the Rural Impact Hub, I would encourage you to go to our website and fill out your contact information to sign up to get updates about all of these things taking place. And also, we have a Rural Impact Hub LinkedIn group that I would encourage you to search for, Rural Impact Hub, and then I believe you should be able to find it. You might have to request to join, but we'll approve you to join the group. And that is purposely this national audience. So we have with us tonight 35 dial-ins, and then I know there are at least 3 of these people that have anywhere from 3 to 10 people joining us. So in the collective going in and out throughout this evening, we've had close to 100 people that have joined from largely the Midwest, but kind of all over the place. So I would encourage you all to connect, because as you're thinking about all of these ideas and so forth, that's a great place to do that. As it relates to using that as a connection point, as well as someone mentioned Apple and programming, and we have an exciting opportunity. The Rural Impact Hub will be hosting some people from Apple Education Division, I believe in April, to talk about how do we bring that to Nebraska. So for those of you that are in Nebraska, I'll be happy if you send me or Kaylee an email to give you an update on that. Not sure where that's going to go, but that's kind of where that's at. And then the other thing was something that Scott and Andrew and Garry and Kim all in some form or another talked about. This graph is totally irrelevant, other than the fact that, and it doesn't even show what I wanted it to show, and I realized that after I put it in there, but that's too bad. When I ask young people and travel and do a lot of keynote speaking to young people in rural communities specifically, what do they want to be when they grow up? They never pick, and ignore the graph, that's the text that matters. They never pick the last 2. They never pick that they want to stay in their hometown or move far away as their top 1, 2, or 3. And of the thousands of young people that I've had the opportunity to speak to, they always pick be rich, change the world, or have a family. And I think that speaks to Scott's initiative with the remote work. It speaks to Andrew's initiatives with young people. It speaks to Kim recruiting people. It speaks to the opportunity with NREDA and what Garry's doing to look beyond the zip code and to look more at where do you want to make your home? Because if you want to work at BCom Solutions, I don't really care where you live. As long as you have skills that are fitting with our company and you align with our mission and our values. And I think that's something that's really important. And if you're feeling discouraged in any way, shape, or form, we might only make up 19% of the nation's population, but we sure have a hell of a lot of the geographic landmass. And I see that as a great opportunity for how do we continue to grow as rural leaders within the community. So I have two quick things. I know we're just a minute over, and I hate going over on these, but I would encourage you to take your phones back out and go back to Menti. You've got another code, and this code is 349344. And I'm a big believer in calls to action. So if you sat on this webinar, you're probably not doing it right. I hope that you will take away something from this. One of them could be reaching out to a panelist. We will share Kaylee's email at the end on our team, and you can reach out to her and she can connect you individually with a panelist. We're not going to share all of their emails on one slide because that would be a lot of emails. So you can reach out to a panelist. Feel free to go to the Rural Impact Hub website. We have a lot of events coming up. We have a media and politics event in office, and we'll be doing a live stream event of that in next month. And then in April, we have a webinar similar to this around rural education. We will have a former officials from the White House, teacher unions, and some new age learning models, including some people that are creating a new version of high school for people in rural communities. And then we also have digital marketing office hours. So every Tuesday, I believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, we offer our expertise at BCom to rural communities that are looking for digital marketing, web design, or just marketing support in general. If you go to the Rural Impact Hub event page, you should be able to see all of those things. So it looks like we have 5 people that are going to support young people in our community through mentorship, people that are going to connect with the Rural Impact Hub, and then people are going to implement ideas that we heard in the panel. No one is reaching out to our panelists, and that's fine. I don't think any of them will be bothered by that. Garry is disappointed in our EDA opportunities. And then we have 2 others. Maybe that's that they're going to reach out to you directly, Garry. My last thing that I will just leave, if you're not already connected with the Rural Impact Hub online, I know I've talked about it, and you don't want to sign up for an event, simply just give us your email address and your name and where you're from. We promise to not bug you excessively. One thing that we are doing in line with collaboration, the spirit of collaboration, I'm collecting the zip codes of everyone that I touch in some capacity through the Rural Impact Hub, through our panelists, to create a map of the people that are having an impact on rural communities. People don't understand sometimes that the Rural Impact Hub is an idea that every community should have. And so we want to create a map of all of those. So if anything else, feel free to just send your email address and your zip code so that we can add you to the map as a community that cares about economic development and cares about rural opportunity, because we want to connect rural collaborators like people on our panel group as well as in other capacities. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to remind you that economic development has many layers. Economic development is synonymous with community development. It's synonymous with diversity.